Lo-fi music has a lot of us wanting to add a more vintage tone to our sound. Whether that's through vinyl, reel-to-reel, or 4-track cassette recorders, we're all chasing that little bit of warmth that's hard to explain but easy to recognize once you hear it. The most common way that I've seen people get into it, and that I actually took myself, was to get into 4-track cassette recorders. But once you start looking into actually buying the hardware units, it can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. Now, fortunately, there's a lot of plugins out there that say they can give you that same kind of sound. So is it worth it to buy a hardware unit, or should you just stick with the plugin? Hi, I'm Josh PVLs. Welcome to a corner in the room that I pretend is my studio. So just to be clear off the bat, today I'm just talking about hardware cassettes. I'm not talking about vinyl or reel-to-reel at all. That's an entirely different ballgame. So what is the cassette sound, really? Cassettes usually sound like the EQ's been squeezed in a little bit. It's not as drastic as vinyl, but it's definitely not as clear or high fidelity as reel-to-reel or digital recording. You also get some wow and flutter in there, wow being the little slight variations in pitch that you hear, and flutter being what makes the sound broken up or fragmented. The easiest way to let you hear the difference between hardware units and their plug-in alternatives is to just do a side-by-side comparison. So the hardware units that I'm going to be using today are the Tascam Portastudio Mark I and the Tascam MF-P01. The three plugins that I'm going to be using are the Calum Audio Tape Cassette, the Aberrant DSP Sketch Cassette, and Waves Factory Cassette. So just so that everything's on a level playing field, I'm going to be recording everything direct into Ableton through the Scarlett Focusrite 2i2, and then bouncing the stems to the different hardware units or the plugins. Let's see how this sounds. I was actually surprised listening back to that. I figured that the plugins would get close to the hardware but wouldn't just quite be able to measure up. But fortunately, they all seem to emulate hardware pretty well. So what can hardware do that software can't? My personal favorite thing to do with actual hardware units is to record a piece direct onto the tape at double tempo and an octave up, and then record it back into my DAW at half speed. So it comes out sounding as the original tempo and octave, but it brings out some really cool textures and little warbly things in the tape. There's also endless cassette loops. If you're not familiar with these, I've actually got a video on my channel where I made one and ran it through the Chase Bliss Audio Mood. But if you want to see somebody who does it incredibly well, there's this guy called Amulets who has a channel almost entirely dedicated to cassette loops. He's actually the guy who inspired me to get into it. The biggest thing that hardware units have over software is you have direct control over how the tape gets worn out. You can mangle it, you can crinkle it all up, put it back on the spool, you can bake it, leave it out in the sun all summer long, whatever you can think of to wear the tape out and get it to sound broken just the way that you want it to. But on the flip side of that, why should you consider software? The first thing that comes to my mind is price. Now, I got my Portastudio Mark I for $375, and that's a cheap Portastudio unit. The MF-P01, which is a cheap 4-track unit, still cost me $150. Compared to the Waves Factory cassette, which was my favorite out of the plugins by far, it was only $60. The Sketch cassette is only $20, and the Kalem Audio one was free. Also, software units don't have to be serviced. With hardware units, you have motors and belts that will either wear out or break, and you'll have to either figure out how to fix it yourself or find someone that you can pay to fix it for you. The biggest thing that software will always have over hardware is convenience. It goes everywhere you go and it loads up in a matter of seconds. If you're like me and you don't have a place in your studio to set up your hardware unit permanently, it means setting it up, finding the right power supply, cleaning it, finding the right cassette that you want to use, recording to, and then bouncing back to your DAW, and then taking it all back down again at the end. It's a long process, whereas the plugin, it's just up in a couple of seconds. Most things that have to do with tone and music are completely subjective. You'll have purists who say that hardware can never be topped, and then you'll have people who say that hardware is a waste of money because it's been emulated in a software that's way cheaper. But the best solution is probably a hybrid. Whether you're talking digital and analog or hardware versus software, you'll probably get the tone you want by working out of a combination of the two. I personally love using my 2 different 4-tracks for different reasons, but a lot of times it's much easier to just load up a plugin and get the tone that I need. I personally don't think it matters. As long as at the end of the day you're happy with the sound you got, use what you have, use what you want. I won't be getting rid of either of my 4-tracks, but it's nice to know that when I'm too lazy to set them up, I can still get the sound that I want. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you got anything that you want to ask or talk about, be sure to drop a comment down below. I'll get back to you. Have a wonderful day.